Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for listening to the and watching the Religion Unplugged podcast, where we try to keep you plugged into all the best religion news and culture. I am here today, your host, Joseph Holmes, film critic and podcast host of the other podcast, The Overthinkers. And with us today, we have a very special guest. He is a filmmaker and co-director of the new film, The Jesus Revolution. He is, I hope I'm getting this right, Brent McCorkle. Is that correct? That's your name?
That's correct, yeah.
Fantastic.
Good to be here, man.
Good to have you here.
Thanks, man.
So first, I just wanted to ask you, could you tell us a little bit about the Jesus Revolution movie, the story, the movie, if you're trying to introducing that to people, and what attracted you to getting involved in that, telling that story?
Yeah, so the other director, John Irwin, we were on another movie together, and he discovered this Time magazine article that had this psychedelic Jesus on it, and it just said Jesus Revolution. He's like, what is this about? And he knew there was a little bit of an evangelical awakening that happened in like 69 and 70, but he didn't know that much about it. Well, he got on Time magazine's archives, and it's not digitally archived anywhere, so he ended up ordering a collector's edition copy off eBay for like $150. But when he read the article, it was pretty compelling, man. And the general story is this. It was a similar time in American history today. Like, you had all the strife, all the divisions, all the hate, all the judgment. You had people definitely picking ideological sides in a culture war. So you had the Vietnam War, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, you had multiple assassinations, JFK, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King. You had obviously the Cold War completely like brewing, all this terrible stuff. You had all of the, the racial disquieting things happening in the country. Martin Luther King and all of that, and it was a tough time. It was really a time of radical division and a ton of anger, a ton of unrest. And on top of that, man, you had modernism kind of at its apogee, and you had these kids looking at this stuff of, this kind of plasticity of their parents' materialism and their little picket fences in their house and their mortgage. And the kids were just looking at their parents' way of being and saying, I don't really want this. And so you had a ton of runaways, you had the hippie movement, you had the countercultural movement, you had, free love and the sexual revolution and all this stuff happening. A lot of it was really great because people we're saying, yeah, we just don't want to live like this. And I think we find ourselves in a similar time today. I think we live in a time of ongoing hatred, of judgment on all sides of the political spectrum. Everyone trying to cancel each other. It's like we'd rather cancel someone that's our political combatant or a political enemy than have a conversation. And I think that's really sad. And I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that this isn't really the America that we want to live in. It's not the one I want to live in, for sure. So the idea was, wouldn't it be cool just to kind of drop a camera back into 1969 and see a time in the Christian faith where these two disparate groups actually came together and found a way to love each other, found a way to create a safe space of love, acceptance, and forgiveness, belonging, compassion, empathy. A lot of the actual core tenets of the Christian religion that it seems have taken a back seat in this time of hatred, So it's a really sweet, loving movie. And it kind of reminds me of like a Muppet movie or something. You find yourself smiling a lot through it and just enjoying it and laughing a lot. And so I really do hope that it's a callback to a time that was inclusive and loving, and these conservative, very starchy white people decide to like open up their church to these really, strange, bizarre, almost like alien humans that they had nothing in common with, it seemed. And so under the banner of Christian love, these two groups were able to come together, and it really sparked something really huge. Now in our movie, we're only with them for 2 years. And so, what it became over time, we just kind of see a revolution of it back to, another time where we're in political hatred and discord again. And so it would be so great if the church would see this but also the culture at large, and say, man, we need a reset. We need a reset culturally. And wouldn't it be great to like start that reset based on love and acceptance and belonging? So yeah, so it was really John's discovery of that article, of that psychedelic Jesus on the Time cover in 1971 that kicked it off, which is really fascinating because if you bookend it with Time in 1968, their cover was this black cover. It just said, "Is God dead?" So you have this 4-year period on Time where this crazy continuum, curve happened. And in the middle of all that was the Jesus movement that was really precipitated by some events in Southern California, which is where our movie takes place.
Okay. So backing up a little bit, tell us a little bit about your filmmaking journey, getting started and getting involved in, the Christian film world, Christian film royalty. I'm working on, the Kingdom Storybook Company. It's kind of the biggest, Christian film studio kind of in the world right now. I think is easy to say. What got you to love movies and wanting to tell the stories, but particularly telling stories within this Christian framework?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. It's really interesting to ask that. I hope I don't offend anyone, but no, I was I'm a pastor's kid.
Same.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Right on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Digital high five. Yeah. So I had my own journey. I got to a place, I think, where a lot of people did, where I didn't know if I could be any sort of Christian anymore. I'm definitely a weird Christian that a lot of people are like, "Are you though?" But we have these conversations a lot. But I just started hitting these cultural walls. I'm like, man, if this is Christianity, I'm out. Like, pull my parachute, pull the ripcord, get me out of here. But the more I kind of brushed all that away and got back to the essence of what Jesus was doing, I mean, he was doing some really radical things in his time. And we lose a lot of that nuance now because it got translated into Greek, and now we're in the West, but we don't really understand Jewish stuff. But man, a lot of the stuff he was doing was social pariah, like even talking to the woman. Well, I mean, like, I think there are things you could be stoned for. Even the parable of the prodigal son, in that culture, that kid would have been stoned. He would have disgraced his father and would stone him to death. But instead he's like, "Hey, I love you, man. You're dated." So he was like, when it says he was a stumbling block to the Jews, he was just saying a bunch of stuff that people were like, "No, dude, you can't say that." So I love that kind of radical essence of Christ, that he really was trying to bring people back towards love. And he said stuff that you can't live up to. I mean, I think I've only met 4 people in my entire life that have actually learned to love their enemy. So how many real Christians are there anyway? It's kind of my question. But so he threw down the gauntlet in some really cool ways. But yeah, I got to a place where I was like, yeah, I'm in, but I just want to approach my faith like a child, almost like a 5-year-old. I read the Bible when I was 5. I'm not a prodigy. I know. I read it when I was 18. I read the Bible all the way through when I was 18. So I know it, and I was raised with that. I went to church like 5 times a week through most of my, childhood and adolescence. And so I'm no stranger to all of it, but I do feel like in the West with the consumerism and the capitalism and just the way that we think, it's, I think in a lot of ways, it needs to go back to formula. It needs to go back to like the basics. And that's what I've tried to do in my own life, just take back to the 5-year-old version of the thing. And really, and like when I look at the 5-year-old version of it, it's love, compassion, acceptance, forgiveness, belonging. And so those are the tenets of Christianity that I take forward with me. And you can see a lot of it showing up in my parts of the film, that I worked on. But yeah, I was raised in the church. Is really cool. Like I always tell people, if you look at American Idol or America's Got Talent, a ton of those kids came from the church because they got their 10,000 hours in a real safe space where they're nurtured and encouraged, and you could really suck.
Yes,
it wouldn't matter. You get to show up in church again the next week and do it again. And so I really do appreciate that about the church. So yeah, I was a little artist kid raised in the church and allowed to suck and slowly develop some chops. So I was a musician in the church. I played piano and sang. I did a lot of drama. I was a worship leader for decades. And I think that sort of set me on a path and really unlocked the artistic core that I had in me. But it wasn't until late life. I was married. I was in a drift artist. I switched majors 5 times. I was really lost. But yeah, late in life, like my late 20s, like, man, I think I really want to pursue filmmaking. So I was in Dallas at the time, and there was nobody making feature films. And so I went to SMU because they had a film program. I took a bunch of film classes, and I just launched out, quit my job at the church that I was working at the time, and launched out and started working on crew and shooting things when I could. But the funnest part of my journey was I would take a camera that usually I begged, borrowed, or stole because I was poor. But I would take a camera and run out in the woods with my friends, and we would shoot dumb little horror films or sci-fi fantasies. And I would grab my kids because they were free actors. And so all my kids have been in my movies. I have 5 kids, and some of my friends from church, they were actually brilliant actors. So we just formed this little co-op of friends, and I started competing in short film festivals, and some of my films were just crap, but then some of them were good, and I would continue to get better. And I started placing in film festivals and winning some of them, and winning best in show. So fast forward to a friend of mine called me saying, "Hey, Steven Spielberg is looking for the next great filmmaker, and he's doing a TV show like an American Idol with Mark Burnett." And I was like, "What? No, he's not." I didn't believe it. I thought they were wrong. And then a second person called me. I was like, well, I better look into this. So I submitted, I got in, I made it really far. I was like in the top 20 on that show. It was called On the Lot in 2007. But what my journey has been a systematic series of failures, like just following my feet. But when I get back up, it's like I tripped forward and I made it a few more yards down the.
Well, that's a good metaphor. Good, nice picture. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, and if you do that enough, you get a first down and get to try again, you know? Yeah. And so it's definitely been like that in my career. But so I failed. I got kicked off the show. I got iced. But when I got home, I had made a short film for that show that never saw the light of day. And they let me have the rights to it, which was so kind of them. And I took that little short film to Sundance, got a rejection letter. It was like the worst rejection letter of my life because it was like $75. And I was so broke about it. Like, hey, thanks for the $75. No, you can't get in, you know? So that was tough. But then the next thing I entered in, I won finals, and they let me make another short film for the final round where they actually gave me a budget.
Wow.
And there were some producers sitting in the audience that saw my film that thought I would be a great voice for a movie that they were trying to do. It was a low budget, like $2.5 million. Sure. But they said, hey man, we think you got the chops. You've been doing shorts forever. We'd like to give you a shot. So that was my first shot at a feature film in 2012. And so that kind of put me on the map, and it did really good on Netflix. And from there, I really have done a lot with John and Andy. Now, I wouldn't be honest on the podcast if I didn't say I was really dragged kicking and screaming into the faith faith-based film. Yeah. I really have a struggle with it. I think again, a lot of the stuff that's happening in our culture, and it's not right or wrong, I'm just observing it. But like, I think sometimes the Christian knee-jerk reaction to culture is to silo things. And so you get CCM and you get Christian movies, and you have like megachurch pastors that want to create Christian amusement parks where only Christians go, or Christian malls or Christian bookstores or whatever. And so I struggle with all that. And I don't, it's a grapple for me. And I guess I don't throw it out or dismiss it out of hand, but it really was a wrestle for me because I do have core values and themes that spin in my heart of like love and redemption. Yeah. But I think a lot of Christian thought, like again, at the 30,000 foot level or the childlike level, what I'm talking about, a lot of that can be explored in mainstream genre of making. So that's what I was hoping to do. I was hoping to do more of like an M. Night Shyamalan type thing where you're exploring deep themes, but using Hollywood high concept. But a lot of this has been a spiritual process for me of like letting go. Like we're all in +5 rapids, and at some point we're going to go over the waterfall. Right. And like what you do with your paddle, you can probably do a little bit with that, but I was trying to do too much, trying to control it. So the moment I kind of started relaxing and letting go, better things started happening for me. So yeah, I've been in a support role with John and Andy Irwin on 5 of their movies.
Nice.
gotten to compose on a lot of things. That's actually one of the favorite things that I do. I'm definitely a Swiss Army knife in filmmaking. I do like everything really. I've worked in every department and held every position, and that's not really a brag. It was more of like a survival instinct because a Swiss Army knife is actually, it's cool because it's a bunch of tools in one, but they're really not. It's not their best knife. It's not the best one.
Right. It's master of all, is a jack of all trades, master of none a little bit. Yes.
Correct. Yeah. And then everybody always introduces me as a jack of all trades to like honor me, but I'm like, I always finish that because it really is true. So I hope that the synergy of all the hats that I wear, like maybe amount to something cooler. Like if I could use a Swiss Army knife to get out of an escape room or something.
Right. Yes, exactly. So this is interesting. So there's a lot. You're listed as co-director on this movie. Typically, John Irwin does, his co-directing with his brother. This one, you are co-directing with him. And, there's a lot of famous, co-directing duos. I mean, there's, the Wachowskis, there's the Russo brothers, and everybody has their own kind of process of collaboration. So I was wondering, it's like, what does that collaboration process look like for you? Are there, things that you guys kind of, your lanes of things that you're kind of specialize in, or do you kind of tag team things? What does that look like, and how for you guys, or at least on your side?
Yeah, we did both. I appreciate the question. We did both. John comes from the director of photography world. He's very technical, but I actually find him very good with actors, especially if we get stuck in a scene. He'll come up with some really good things. I love it all. The hardest part for me in this movie was taking a backseat on the shots, because I'm all about my shot and shot flow and like how I want the emotion to work as we move through these shots. And so it's John Irwin, who's a DP. And we actually had a very talented DP. So I was definitely a third wheel. I got maybe 5 shots in this movie, and they're really great. I'd go to and go, guys, that's the shot. And they'd be like, oh man, you're right. But that was few and far between. It was John and Akis, who was an incredible director of photography. So it was those guys.
Gotcha.
Like working on the shots. And I worked with the actors more. I prepped the film. I was in charge of hiring the keys. We found an amazing production designer out of Atlanta. She just is like one of the most talented human beings I've ever worked with, Amy Holmberg. And I really found that the photography and Amy's work really complemented each other. We got great mise en scène, like some of the best mise en scène I've ever had in my stuff. And so we did have some division of labor there. So he focused more on the shots, and I would watch monitor a lot. Sure. Because he's out with the camera. And so it was great, because sometimes I even wall off from set. So I would go out and adjust the actors. I'd go back and watch monitor and just actually watch what the movie was. And it was amazing. Every shot that would lay down, I'd be like, wow, okay, I think we have something special here. So
I'll say this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I'll say this as a viewer, the 2 things that really loved in this movie I thought were excellent. One is, the shots, which I thought were, I think that, which were very spiritual, I actually found, because, there was this sense of transcendence with a lot of them, but it was also very personal and intimate. And so I thought that like a lot of that you guys, and you were trying, that's sort of what you're trying to say. You're talking about trying to describe God that way. And so I thought you actually got that across visually. So good on you about that. I'll also say, to your point of the actors, you have an amazing cast here that you actually were able to really get a lot of really great performances out of. So like a lot of people know, I mean, you have it maybe like one of the coolest kind of ensemble casts of a Christian film that I've seen. You've got obviously Kelsey Grammer, from the Frasier show and other things. And of course you have the new golden child of the actor of the Christian film world, which is Jonathan Rumi, playing a similar but very different role. For people who don't know, Kelsey Grammer plays Chuck Smith, who's as you described, the more uptight conservative pastor of a church, and then you have Jonathan Rumi, who plays Lonnie Frisbee, who's the hippie preacher who comes in there, and their friendship, aside from Greg Laurie, the young protagonist, their kind of friendship is the heart of the movie. So I guess I'll ask you sort of like, what were you involved in the process of like casting those actors, and what was it like to work with them?
Yeah, that was another great division of labor. So Kevin Downs, our main producer, he's really plugged in on the casting level. And man, you really you got to go out to these managers and really make the case for things. And so you have two ways that you get your cast. One is you're like, I want this person. Let's talk to their people, find out how much money they're going to try to charge and see if we can even do it. See if they're interested, send them the scripts. So we had maybe 4 or 5 of our top tier like that. Just, these are the guys, can we get them? And without fail, we got the people that we wanted. So those would have been Kelsey Grammer, Jonathan Rumi, Devon Franklin, Kimberly Paisley, and one other that I'm leaving out right now. I'll think of them in a second. But then the rest is me and casting directors. So John and Kevin handled the offers only.
Yeah.
Then I got with some amazing casting directors. I had some incredible directors, casting directors in LA. And then I was a fussy baby, and I was like, all right, listen, here's what happens on these medium tier films. We get great casts out of LA, and then nobody thinks about the rest of the cast. I was like, I want a killer casting director that we get the rest. So I had Mark Fincannon out of Atlanta, and he's like world renowned casting director. And he agreed to just help me fill in. And man, it was like an incredible casting process. And everybody we picked, I kept waiting for the shoe to drop. It's just everybody be like, yeah, I'll do it. Or that's them. Yeah, they're available. You know, like we just got everyone with hardly any hiccups. If there were hiccups, I don't recall them right now. And they were very minimal. It didn't affect casting hardly at all. So yeah, John and Kevin were kind of in charge of getting the high level, you know, the offer only is what we call.
Right. Yeah.
And then they tasked me with casting the rest of the movie. So I got to cast, I don't know, 90% of this movie with casting.
It's a great cast. So good.
So, yeah,
at every level. It's a great job.
Oh, Joel Quarton. That's who I missed. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Great. He was attached from the beginning. And yeah, his stuff was really good. And he's just a wonderful human being. They all are, dude. I loved this cast.
So what was it like working with these people?
I would encourage everybody to look Kelsey up. He's had a really hard life. He's had a lot of terrible things happen to him and his family. And man, that guy just exuded peace. And I would try to get around him and spend more time with him. I've called him, asked him for spiritual advice, because I can tell he's further up the mountain than me. He carries more peace than me on a daily basis. And he's actually had a lot worse things happen to him in his life. I'm looking up to him in a major way, but man, he was a force, man. Like all that gravitas, you know, and he's real tall. And so he just has this, when he walks on set, everybody's like, whoa, you know, he's just got a presence. But on top of that, man, he's just super, super humble. And John always brags on him. But like anytime we would adjust or need to change anything, he would be like, yeah, boss. You know, he's just very, very humble, just unassuming. And Jonathan Rumi, man, he was very committed to the role, very committed to Lonnie, and like really cared about how we portrayed Lonnie and all that. And so it was a cool thing happening. And Joel worked his tail off. Anna Grace Barlow, who played Kathy, was an incredible actress. Ali Ionides as the pastor's kid, which they let me do some rewriting on that because I was like, hey, I've lived this. I am her. Will you let me write her? And so they let me arc her and Chuck's wife a little bit more too. I wanted a strong sense of arcing, especially with the female characters. And so they let work on those a little bit. And Charlie Patton, who played Connie, Lonnie's wife, Nick Bishop, Jolie Jenkins. I mean, just amazing cast, an amazing crew. Honestly, I mean, it was the best crew I had ever had, and I understand where the auteur theory came from, but I think it's overused and it's abused, and so I won't name any directors, but the loud, outspoken directors that take credit for everything, and it's like their vision or whatever. I just think it's bull crap. It's like them saying they sailed this giant pirate ship across. It made like an intercontinental transit in a 400 crew pirate
Sure,
ship.
yeah.
No, you didn't. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You can say you did, but you didn't. You had a bunch of crew like busting their butt to make sure the ship got across. Now, were you at the helm on the wheel and all that? Yeah. And someone has to be the ultimate decision maker.
Sure.
But auteur theory basically says you did it on your own. And I don't espouse those views. I'm very much like a blue collar.
Sure.
I feel like we all did it together and we made it. So yeah, it was just the best band of pirates I've ever gotten to sail with,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, film is one of those, it's one of the most irreductibly collaborative art forms that exists. It's You can't have a film without multiple art forms all working together, and if one of them isn't working well, it doesn't work. So that's very true.
Yeah. And what happens when you're clashing with an actor? They're completely reading the text differently. Then you have to strike a compromise because it's so cool, man. One of my friends is an executive producer for Sam Raimi, and he goes, one thing Sam has taught me, he's like, the director must be skilled first and foremost in the art of compromise. And I love that saying. I've taken that with me everywhere because you don't have to get your way. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't get your way because you're all in it together and compromises need to be made. And oftentimes when you capitulate and you compromise, like someone else's idea is better anyway. Because I think a director's biggest mandate on set is to kind of cipher and funnel through all the ideas and pick the one they feel is best. And it may not be yours. Yeah. So
makes a lot of sense. Now, one of the things, I think you talked sort of about the traction of the story, partly being its parallels to today and had divided time now, a divided time. Then we have a young generation that's disillusioned with the religion and the establishment and leaving the faith because of it. And this idea that some of the things that they did then, we can do now and perhaps have the kind of, success that they had then now in terms of, in terms of bringing a kind of revival back. And I've seen that in the, marketing and interviews and such. And I went to a pre-screening with other Christian influencers, and that was sort of what people were taking away from it. My problem with that narrative is that, there are a couple of things. One is that there was no revival that happened based on it worthy of the word. If you look at the rates of religious attendance or people who are Christians identifying as Christians, it went down in the 1960s. It may have sort of gone down slower in the 70s, but then, it just kept going down. There is, no, even if you say, well, it wasn't the fault of this, movement that it kept going down, it certainly didn't do anything to visibly reverse the trend. And so it's the idea that recreating what they did then is the answer is a bit dodgy. Also because, you have the question of, even if that did work back then, what it would look like to recreate it now it's not obvious that doing the same thing now would work because, again, it's not like people, it's not like we have a lack of places where you can, do creative, Christian rock concert kind of services or let people in without shoes is quite the issue. When people are saying we need to be more welcoming and accepting to various different groups, typically what they're talking about is in terms of gender identity or sexuality, or the problem or women, with elevating women to positions, places like that, which is all well and good. The problem is those denominations that are doing that are the ones that are shrinking numbers faster. So it doesn't seem like that's the key thing that's holding people back. Now you could be saying racially, which would be interesting. Like people have made that argument that being more welcoming to, more racial groups is important, which I think it is. But that doesn't, isn't a part of the movie that the storytelling. It's, the movie is whiter than snow aside from the reporter. So I guess, it's difficult for me to see this as an inspirational model for today, as the movie is sort of trying to pitch it for those reasons. What would, I guess, your response be to that? What am I missing sort of about the message that you're getting, or what I see as the problems with it? How would you push back on that to a skeptical kind of viewer like myself?
Yeah, I guess I'd ask you one more question before I answer. What do you think a revival would look like today?
I don't know. I mean, that's something that I'm searching and seeking for. I certainly think that one aspect of what a revival would look like would be numbers going back up rather than down. Numbers going up in terms of committed Christians who are buying into Christianity, regularly attending church, regularly both claiming and acting out the beliefs of it. And we don't see that right now. We see, the numbers going down of people professing and practicing the faith. But we didn't see back then with the Jesus Revolution a turning back of people professing and practicing the faith. So that's what it would look like to me. I don't know how we get there, but it seems like the answer that this is giving, I'm not seeing the evidence that it worked then or would work now.
Gotcha. No, those are all great points, man, and heard and noted, duly noted. I actually agree with a lot of what you're saying. I'm a mystic. So for me, I just want the world to feel a different way than it does. And so I think there's a couple things that are happening, and obviously it's the secularization and the more that we understand about the science and
sure.
Even figuring out that the entire universe doesn't revolve around the earth. It blew people's minds. People started killing each other. They throw people in prison. They killed science, saying, no, I don't think the earth is the center of, So as we learn more about science and our universe, and the scientific world is opening up more portals and mysteries, I think it is kind of cleaning people's clocks, on a faith level. That doesn't fully discourage me from it. But I guess the big thing I want to get out of it, and what I kind of have a different take than what a lot of people say around the film, but I feel like the biggest thing this movie can do is call the church back to love. And we're in a time right now where we need a love revival. And I don't think that means I need people to go to an evangelical church or anything like that. I just feel like that God is love. And I know that's kind of a lofty kind of artisty thing to say, but
if the shoe fits.
Yeah, right. But, it's just really cool to hear some of the stories. Me and John and Andy, one thing we're completely aligned on is we just hire the best artists and the best people for the position. So I don't care if you're painted orange or you walk on your hands. I don't care. Whatever, just come work on this movie. You don't have to be in some sort of evangelical club to come work on this movie.
Thank God. It makes the movie better. Yeah.
Well, right. Because it's the best people in every seat on the bus, and it shows up in the work. But I will say, people were in tears, and not just the Christian people. Man, this is beautiful. We showed them clips and stuff. Wow, this feels really beautiful. This might be the most important thing I've ever worked on. So I think I do believe in the arising force of love in the universe, and it doesn't fit inside any Darwinian metrics for me. There's really not a utility for it. There might be a social utility, protecting your DNA or
sure.
Protecting your child. Don't let your kid go over a cliff because you're actually killing yourself because that's your DNA. So there's a selfish Darwinian thing, but it doesn't explain why we grieve so hard when people die or something like that. So
Wow, you're pulling an Interstellar on me.
Yes. Well, Interstellar is my religion, because it never talks about God, and yet there's this arising force in the universe that makes all of it work. It makes that whole thing work. The love between a father and a daughter, and I wept, man. I wept. That movie brought me to my knees, and like that is probably one of the greatest church sermons I've ever heard in my entire life. So if this movie can call some people back to love, I think the revival is, if there is going to be anything that anybody even says is a revival, and I've said this and frustrated some people, but man, it's got to come back to love. And like, I really hope this movie calls the entire culture back to love. Sure. So I think there needs to be a conversation about love in the church, but there also needs to be a larger conversation in our culture about love, because right now we'd rather scream at somebody in all caps than have a conversation with them. We'd rather try to cancel them than actually listen with curiosity or listen to understand.
Right. I mean, that's fair. That's a fair response. I appreciate the honesty and pushback.
Well, can I say one more thing now?
You can say one more thing. Yes.
Okay. The other thing that's happened is religion will naturally decrease when like all of your basic survival needs are met. Like, so it's like your 6 basic human needs are met. It's like, well, I don't need God. So you and I would be having a different conversation, not on a podcast, like around a fire or something, but if like an EMP went off or like a nuke went off on our floor or something like that, like you start thinking more like eternally. So right now, what's out of vogue is just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away. Our days are decent, and like, and the kids are dealing with anxiety, depression because they're bored and they're on their phones and they're struggling with identity. I get that. I'm addicted to my phone too. But if we were living in more dire straits, like if we were living in times where it's sticks and stones and you don't know when the tribe is going to roll in and slaughter everybody and like take your women and children away, you're going to have more of a dialogue, an inner dialogue with a higher power or a higher being. Because you look to your left and your right and you're like, wow, man, this is unstable. I'm going to die. And so I think, I literally think like kind of in the West, we've like infantilized ourselves to the point of like not really needing a God or not really needing a higher power.
At least our needs to him are invisible to us. Yeah.
So where I find myself being led a lot spiritually is my 2 spiritual mentors in life are both alcoholics, and they've gone through the 12-step program and they get to the bottom of it, and they're just completely suffering and they're trying to control all their lives. They get to the bottom of it. It's, whoa, man, like I need a higher power for this to make sense. And I think I've gone through that process in and of myself, but until I think we all get there, I think right now we've really kind of evolved into this state of self-reliance, and it's just a push of a button and you get any content that you want. You can microwave your food, and like any domestic situation is solved on television in a 25-minute episode. And I think we've literally kind of like numbed ourselves out to this idea that we are going to die, and you need to think about, we do need to be thinking about like what we are, like, what am I? I'm definitely having a human experience in this existential plane, whatever it is. But I think a lot of people, man, we're so like, there's so many shiny objects around us, that I think it deters us from having the conversation. On top of that, man, I think rightfully so, this younger generation should be turned off to a lot of organized religion. I'm kind of a neo hippie. I would have been one of those kids. It's like, I'm done, man. Get me out of this. I can't do it. I think a lot of the kids feel that same way. So I wish kids, especially in youth in this culture, could kind of cut through the cultural BS and the cultural war and all this stuff that divides us, actually look into the stuff that Jesus did, because there was a lot of very radical things that he did that were completely outside of the religious main. And I think we find ourselves there one more time. So I'm throwing a lot of different things at you, but I definitely take no offense at the things that you're saying. I think, again, I'm a futurist. I love science. I think true religion will not be disrupted by any type of scientific revelation. Like, I think whatever we're in, like, we need to be searching for truth, and science is trying to uncover truth too. So I'm trying to find that merge of my belief system with what we know to be true and factual. And so, yeah, I just think we live in a time where people just don't feel like they need God. So it makes sense, right? You send a missionary over to like a third world country where they don't even have clean drinking water. You could see where that type of people group would be more receptive to an idea of like, oh, there's a better place when you die. There's like no suffering. And you don't have to drink any water because you'll just be filled all the time with this spiritual water. You won't be hungry. You won't be thirsty. And that'll be mind blowing, man. If you're holding a kid, you're holding a kid as they're dying because they're dying of hunger. That would be very comforting to them. But like, in the West, man, we're so spoiled, and like, we don't have to think about that. And so, my gut feeling on your question is, if we got nuked and we got sent back to the Stone Age, I think there would be a resurgence of belief. So yeah, man, sorry, I kind of left it. I kind of went in a very circuitous pattern to answer your question.
That's fair. No, that's totally fair. I guess. So, you know, I have a sort of follow-up question and then two final questions, if that's okay.
Sure, of course.
We have time for, all right, cool. So the follow-up question is, so on the religious front, that's sort of one thing. But you also, a lot of your focus is on the coming together in love and a lack of division. But even that, you know, I don't know. It didn't really there wasn't very much lasting in that regard either. In the, you know, there's like, you know, again, the divisiveness may have had a bit of a flat line for a little bit, and then it just went right back again and increased divisiveness. So even sort of in that score, you know, is there something they did wrong that made it so that that the revival of unity didn't last? And if so, it might be good for us to know what that wrong thing is so that we don't imitate it today, if it did work. But I'm sort of skeptical that it had much, you know, effect at all at the time.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too. So you experience this pressure wave and it kind of rises up and then it ebbs back out, and you know, it's a wave, right? And so what is a way to create a wave of sustainability as opposed to just a little blip on the timeline? I don't know. I'd have to think about that. That's the first time someone has ever asked me that. I think the Jesus movement is really fascinating. I think one thing that I felt like we tried to do is show that it is possible. But I don't disagree with you that it was a waning effect. And you know, you don't really see any leftovers of that other than I would say, with the exception of all these really cool, like, old Jesus movement hippies that come and find me after the screenings, like, I was there, man, thank you, you know, I was there, and crying, and you know, they remembered it. So I mean, those people by and large definitely stayed in the church, but as far as like a continuous movement that took the church in a super, super positive direction over decades, I wouldn't contend with you on that point. But I do think it showed what is possible with unity. And people don't let me talk about this stuff, and it's very offensive to some people. But I mean, if you look back at United States history, the evangelical church largely sat out the civil rights movement in the 60s. They were afraid to get involved. As a matter of fact, Billy Graham on his deathbed said that was his largest regret in his life, that he didn't march with Martin Luther King. And I think conservatives, you know, in the church especially, right, there's just kind of like holding back, like, well, let's just wait and see, and let's just we just like everything as it is. And so I think that kind of started the pot, but then it just simmered back down to, again, like, as it is, right? Just kind of like, let's just keep everything how it was. So anything that disturbs the force a little bit, maybe it's short-lived because of those things. But I will say, I do think unity is possible. I'm not skeptical enough to say that this movie couldn't bring about another deep look at unity. My final thing I'll leave you with on that front, and I've really thought about this deeply, but at one time in America, there were two Jesus cultures. And both Jesus cultures went to church, they read their Bible, they educated their children in the Word of God. And one of those cultures had slaves, and they used the Bible to keep their slaves down, to keep them in line, to teach them that they were actually anointed by God to be their slaves. But then there's this other Jesus culture, that were the abolitionists, that were like, well, what we read from the Bible is slavery's wrong. We're going to do everything we can, even put our lives in peril to like stop the slavery. So like I hear the atheists and I get all that, and and then I do hear stuff on the far right of Christianity too. That there's traditional family values and stuff. So I mean, I guess I'm definitely in the center. I don't drink the Kool-Aid on either side of the spectrum, but I would tell everyone it's important to decide what kind of culture you're going to build around Jesus, because you can build whatever freaking culture around him you want. And there's been some great culture, I think, built around him, and some terrible culture. And like you said, those cultures seem to move in ebbs and flows, and there are hegemonic shifts in our culture and paradigm shifts that occur. And so a lot of these things don't seem to stick. But I will say, when you look at the Christian slaveholders, which, let's be honest, they were, but then you have the abolitionists. So I guess for me, even with this movie, what kind of culture are we going to try to build around Jesus going forward, and who he was, and like asking ourselves who Jesus really was? And like, because I guess to the slave owners, they thought Jesus wanted them to have slaves, but to the abolitionists, they were like, no way, man, Jesus would never condone this. We got to do everything we can to stop this, even if we get killed doing it, So yeah, man, I think that's the question we should be asking. So I just feel like in our movie, for a brief moment in time, there was this beautiful coming together and this unification of these two very awkward tribes that really didn't have any business like interacting in the same building, and yet they found a way to do it. I don't disagree that it could be short-lived, but I guess the bigger question to be asking is there a beautiful culture that could be constructed around the things that Jesus stood for in his life? And I think the answer is yes.
Fair enough. Okay. So two more questions. I mean, one of them you kind of answered already, but I'll let you leave it with that at the last question. But second one is so I'm trying to figure out how best to phrase this question. But, I find that in a lot of Christian films, there is, and I'm not as much of a critic of Christian films as some other people are. I don't bang that drum as often. But I do find if I have one kind of big, fairly consistent criticism of Christian films, there's a certain level of dishonesty in them about what life is like in certain ways, how messy and ugly it can be. And I liked one aspect of this film that, again, my favorite part of it was the scene where, Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee are yelling at each other and having their breaking apart. I thought that was an incredibly honest moment of conflict that I've actually seen occur. And I've had arguments that are similar to that with people. And so I thought it was, and of course, it's two great actors doing that. I thought it was brilliant. So the fact that it's more willing to do that other places, but I mean, as an example, one of the big, of course, obvious omissions is that, Lonnie Frisbee died of AIDS. You say at the end that he died, and you sort of suspiciously early, but he died of AIDS, and he died of AIDS because he was continuing off and on to be a practicing gay man while after he was, a Christian, and which brings up different questions. You can have different points of view on that. One is that, well, there's nothing really wrong with being, gay, and which, fair enough. He didn't espouse that, when he was alive. But the other is, well, does that mean that he, was not really saved? If he still continued to struggle with that. And the other is, well, and so maybe there's something wrong with the movement if it didn't save him in that way. Or maybe, you can continue to struggle with things that are still sin, during your life, and it doesn't all completely get fixed. And that is a sort of a thing that happens in Christian films, is they tend to do the, okay, you've been saved, you've been converted, and you're fixed. And even in this movie, I do see like the moments that are conflict tend to be overcome fairly quickly, and it spends a lot more time on the high than it does on the individual moments of conflict, which is why like keeps being a new conflict that comes up. And there is that kind of aspect of I don't kind of like the putting everything under prosperity gospel preaching, because I think that kind of flattens everything. But there's a sense in which you get saved and you're not going to really fall afterwards. Maybe you'll have some pride issues like Lonnie does, but it's never going to be something that's truly discrediting of the gospel. And I guess my one of my literal questions is, was there a reason to leave out Lonnie's homosexuality and struggles with that in the movie? Was there a discussion about that, and why was that decision made? And do you feel like that falls into the dishonesty trap of lying by omission for all of those reasons? And in general, do you feel like there is pressure to kind of make things rosier than they are when you've worked on projects like this, or Christian film, not from the audience primarily, I'm sort of talking about? I don't know how much you feel like you can say on that, or if you want to push back on sort of my characterization of it, but what would you say about that?
Oh yeah, no, there was a ton of conversation about this. Mainly I on my side of it, I'm definitely more of the centrist of the group for sure.
Sure, yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I do have to be careful how I answer all this, because I hope this doesn't sound like bragging or condescending, but
you can brag. It's fine.
I just have more of a generous faith. I mean, like I think God's love, if there is a God, and this God is a pure being of love, which is what the Bible says. That love is bigger than anything we can comprehend. So a lot of this stuff kind of falls by the wayside, and it becomes moot to me as a personal, as a soul having this human experience. Now to get to your answers. We wanted as many people as possible to find this movie. And we didn't want people to trip over it. So like where we landed was, okay, we're looking at these 2 years of his life. And during these 2 years of his life, he's newly married, but he's already fallen into like a really turbulent relationship with his wife. And, quite frankly, within, as the movie closes, he and his wife are divorced within a year of the movie. So we did omit some things. Like, we could have put Lonnie and Connie got a divorce in 9 months after they went to Florida. And there was a lot of stuff we left out, but what we ended up trying to do was focus on more of the positivity that happened in the 2 years of his life. Everything that you threw out that he struggled with is true. He disavowed the homosexual lifestyle. I have to leave that with him. I don't know him. I never got a chance to speak with him. And so I think what we tried, actually, it's counterpoint to your criticism. What we tried to do was be honest within that 2 year time period and leave the rest out to the people to find on Wikipedia. And there's some crazy arguments going on. I personally believe that, to your point, I think one of the most dishonest things that Christian filmmakers do is, like you were saying, that, you have some sort of evangelical experience and then your life is like pixie dust and roses and unicorn, and you're never really going to struggle again, or if you do, you're not saved or whatever. That's not my persuasion. Those are not my beliefs. And as a matter of fact, it's not biblical, because if you do espouse views, of belief in the Bible, well, then your heroes of faith that you look up to and preach about all the time, actually read their entire stories, because they are nuts. They're nuts, very messed up people. And so I actually really appreciate about John Irwin. Like, John Irwin's main theme was that God uses broken and flawed people to do great things in the world and bring about
loving events in the world. And so yeah, man, we tried to be honest to Lonnie's life and how he was living in those 2 years. But everything you said about him is right. But the truth of the matter is we don't really know, only than his own words, only then in his own words. And he wrote some biographies, but like he never said in his own words that homosexuality was okay. And that kind of thing. And so it's a wrestle, it's a struggle, because he was complicated in his relationship with same-sex attraction and stuff like that. He had a really complicated way that he talked about it and that he operated. And it wasn't just same-sex attraction with him. You know, he was hard to lead, and he partied a lot. Like he'd go out on you go out on ragers and like show up the next morning and preach. And, you know, if you're like, I don't know, man, you know, so yeah, I mean, if you take an honest, deep, brutal look at his life, he had some moral problems, I guess, at least you would say, inside of our culture. They were definitely moral problems. But Chuck was a workaholic. Chuck harmed his family at times by spending way too much time in the ministry instead of which is the key, like, core wound that, you know, pastors' kids get dealt. The church becomes the pastor's like full-time family in a way, it seems, for a lot of guys, you know,
I forget who said it. There was some woman who was married to a famous theologian preacher, and I forget which one. So I'm sure somebody out there who's watching this, listening to this, will know and correct me. But she was married to him, and then he died, and she married again. And she said, sort of the two of them, you know, my first husband loved God, and my second husband loved me. You know, and so there is, and so that's that. So just to say, that is a real wound that does happen to, and I didn't feel that personally in that way that many other people did, but like definitely, which may be why I'm still a Christian, you know.
My dad made time for me, and, you know, went to my ball games, and he was a very balanced human being. But you do hear that story. Of,
yes, like, you hear that story a lot.
Yeah. So for me, and I've had a lot of people say this, and I do appreciate it. And I would encourage you to go like on the Jesus Rev Facebook site, because, like, you know, some people will be like, well, Lonnie was gay, but a lot of people are like, yeah, well, dude, what's going on in your life? Do you want to tell us like some of your struggles? It's like people are understanding, like, we all struggle, but it seems to me like culturally we put weighted scores on.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Oh, that guy's an alcoholic. Oh yeah, well, my neighbor like smokes crack. So, you know, it's like you're trying to one up each other.
Sure. It's the Sin Olympics. It's the Sin Olympics. Yes.
Yeah. It's like, who's going to win, you know? And like right now it's obviously, you know, LGBTQ and sexuality things. And, but man, like, I guess again, in our culture, it's gotten so judgmental and hateful, and it's easy to like maybe throw rocks at the church, but it's an all encompassing problem. Yeah. It's endemic to our culture, to the far left, all the way to the far right, everybody in between. Yeah. And so if this movie can just maybe bring just a little bit of hope and light and show, like, to your point, even just for a brief moment, that unity is possible. I agree and find your points to be well taken. I think the church is in decline, not only for just kind of the secularization of what's happening in the West. That's a big part of it. But I also think, man, there's just a huge disconnect between what kids are looking for spiritually and what they see like the loudest leaders of the Christian church kind of screaming and pounding the pulpit over. And a lot of those are political constructs. And, you know, when I read the Bible, it was crazy, man, but Jesus like took great pains to stay out of politics. And quite frankly, he was living in an occupied country that was highly oppressed. And instead of like, we're going to kick the Roman, he was like, hey man, if that Roman comes up to you, I know it's law, and he says, you got to walk a mile, just go ahead and walk an extra mile. Let's kill him with kindness, man. Like you got to love your enemies. And so like, I feel like he threw down an impossible gauntlet. Like for me, I love how Buddhists say we practice our religion, we practice meditation. Like to me, I really feel like I wish there was a lot more of that in Christianity, because when I think of Jesus, like, I'm practicing more towards how he lived and he showed us to live. And like, there's no way I'm even going to get close I feel like maybe I've done 30%. I'm about to be 50. I feel like I'm like 30% of the way there. So I'm running out of time. You know, I'm on the back nine holes of golf. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, but I feel like he left us a wonderful example, and you know, I'm trying to live up to more of the example and the pattern that he left for us. But yeah, man, all those points, well taken.
And well responded to.
Huh? Oh,
and
thanks.
well responded to. Yeah.
Well, you know, filmmaking's crazy too, because you know you do have to entertain, and I do think you compromise and like leave some things out to make it a good piece of entertainment. And as far as the Christian faith film genre goes, I am proud of leaving in some of the rawness, and it's not all tied up with a bow. And some people have found me after screenings like, man, I'm just bummed that they all split up. But I mean, that's real life, dude. That's real life. I got a DM from one of my crew today, and I didn't even know it, but like in one of the departments, there was a huge falling out, and like that department doesn't even work together anymore. They all went their separate ways, and it hurt my heart. But at the same time, we have these chapter endings in the journey that often don't end well. And yet the page turns over and you reboot and you start into something new, and you remember the pain, and maybe you learn some lessons from it, but it doesn't seem to me to be a storybook ending oftentimes. So I guess I do like those elements in our movie, that we didn't storybook ending every story, every timeline. We didn't close every loop with a book.
Same.
So could we have gone further? Yeah, sure. So then it's that, then you're like turning the knob of how wide your film will go with an audience. I think so.
No, fair enough.
You're right to call it out. It's fair for you to call it out, right? Like how much of it is calculated to be entertaining and make everybody happy. And like, you know, I do feel like maybe we made the right decision, so people will feel energized maybe to look into their own heart, their own local church family on are we leaving people out? Are we like a hate forward culture? Or are we a love forward culture? And because man, you know, what we need, church or not, we just need more safe spaces for people. And I think it'd be really cool if the Christian church was considered to be more of a safe space for people to come, like be themselves and tell you what's going on. So in their lives. So yeah, man. I appreciated your candor on some of those questions. And I think a lot of that does need to be explored, but it's like in the film We Bought a Zoo. They actually did you see that movie?
I did not.
Okay. That's real sweet. But like in the real story, they got a divorce.
Sure.
The family got a divorce, but in the movie they killed her. In the movie they gave her cancer and killed her, you know? But for the movie, it actually works better because they're grieving her loss. They're grieving her death, and they're trying to pick up the pieces. Their family is in ashes. And so sometimes, you know, I mean, that sounds terrible, right? Just like, well, let's just smoke this human that's actually still alive, but let's smoke them so we can hammer harder at the story we're trying to tell. So rightly or wrongly, I think, you know, filmmakers make those decisions sometimes, you know, to try to maybe put a finer point on the one or two things that you are trying to do. But I think you're turning the lever between like an art house film that 6 people go see, and it's a masterpiece and it's going to get 100 on Rotten Tomatoes, or something that's like more mass appeal and going to get a 76 on Rotten Tomatoes, you know? So you're right to pick on this stuff for sure. And it's obviously a real thing that you deal with when you're looking at mass, like populist filmmaking. So.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. This was a great interview. I really appreciate your candor and your time. Where I guess people can go see. I encourage people to go see your work on IMDb, all the things that you've done, and see And if people are interested in this movie, they can also see Jesus Revolution in theaters February 24th. Anywhere else that you'd like to send people?
Oh, if you want to scream at me on my Instagram in all caps, you can. It's Brent McCorkle, BrentMcCorkle. Loving notes are welcome too, but I love my Instagram, and I love talking to people on Instagram. And it's amazing all the kids, even overseas, who like want to make films and they just don't have. Where they don't have a camera, and but they'll reach out to me, and I don't know, man, it's cool. I love Instagram. I love it being, of course, photography based. And so, if you want to talk to me, just find me on Instagram. We'll chat. I love talking to people on Instagram. So
fantastic.
Thanks for this interview, man. And keep punching out there, man. I just want, at the sake of sounding like a dreamy artist, which I am, but I just want more love in the world, and I hope this film maybe at least starts conversations in that direction.
Well, I'm not Scrooge enough to object to more love in the world. So thank you very much, sir. And you have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thanks for spending some time with me, man. Take care.
You too.